Whiskey, particularly Scotch whiskey, has captured my imagination and my palate for many years now. You could say I'm a bit of a foodie, so whether it's trying a new cuisine or coffee roast, I love the adventure of picking out flavours and discovering how they blend together. And whiskey's just part of my exploration and expression of 1 Corinthians 10:31, which says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all for the glory of God." So every year, when we go back as a family to Scotland, we spend a couple of weeks at my family's house on the island of Islay. Now, Islay is known as Whiskey Island due to its 9 world-renowned distilleries there. So much so that Islay is considered its own region of whiskey. Needless to say, I've spent many an afternoon touring around the distilleries and hearing their origin stories as they took me through each part of the whiskey making process. You see, much of the excitement of the process is found where you can engage all of the senses, tasting the malted barley before it's milled, the smell of the washback followed by the punch of carbon dioxide as the liquid ferments, feeling the heat off of the massive copper stills and seeing the clear spirit run through the spirit safe. But the excitement of the final drink happens during the less exciting stage of the process, maturation. This is where the liquid sleeps in a dingy, dark, usually damp warehouse for years on end, waiting to be awakened at the right time. Interestingly, the liquid's time in the barrel accounts for up to 80% of the final flavour. Minimally for Scotch, it needs to be aged for 3 years, but it could be up to 50 years or more. It has an occasional visit from the master distiller from time to time as he or she gauges whether it has reached completion or it needs to be transferred into a different barrel to finish its maturation process. Paradoxically, as the liquid sits still, as the years tick by, the barrel is full of invisible activity. The used and charred wooden staves that were once holding bourbon, sherry, wine, or rum are releasing tannins, flavor, and color into the liquid. Oxidation in the sealed cask creates a slow breathing process where the liquid expands and contracts as the seasons change, pulling in new compounds and leaving behind others. Esterification contributes fruit-like aromas and flavors, and over the years, it softens and becomes richer in flavor as it takes on this environment. As the liquid ages and matures, 1 to 2% of the liquid is lost in the process. It's what they call the angel's share, amounting to up to 25% of lost spirit over the course of a 25-year maturation. That becomes a very expensive form of shrinkage for distilleries. Yet, what they lose in volume, they gain in flavor. Why did I bring this up? Well, I find a lot of similarities of the Christian life to whiskey making. The first is that age does not always indicate quality. Some very old whiskey can be over-oaked and bitter, while some barrels reach completion only after a handful of years in the barrel and taste great. Second, the maturation process is a progressive and gradual loss of the original makeup so that you can take on the characteristics you need to become who you were meant to be. And lastly, the exciting, vibrant, emotive stuff happens at the beginning, but seems to fade. But in actuality, the real maturing work happens in the quiet recesses of a long and faithful stay in close contact with the one we are becoming more alike, taking on more color and characteristics. So, how do we become mature as Christians? That's this week on A Little Better. Our goal on this podcast is to know Jesus better and with the power of His Spirit, do better, so together we can be a little better. Welcome back to the A Little Better podcast, where we aim to help Christians mature in their faith. And today I'm joined by Matt Soanes, my boss. in some ways this might feel like a bit of like my one-on-ones where we're just like talking about stuff.
Hopefully it's as fun.
Hopefully it's better than that. We are a bit more organized too. But today we're talking about something that has been on our hearts for a long time. So Matt, you oversee ministries. And so when it comes to helping people mature, this is really your thing. And so we are starting a series on Sunday morning, and adjacent to that, we're doing this series. So on Sunday, we're doing 4 weeks, but on the podcast, we're doing 6 weeks because we want to go really deep into what it is, what it means to be mature. Why is maturity important? What does the Bible say about maturity? And what are, we're going to say, makers and markers of spiritual maturity. So this is going to be, I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah.
But would you like this? Hit the like button if you find this really helpful. Subscribe if you want to be kept up to date, and share the episode at any point where you're like, this is going to be helpful for someone that I know. But we're going to start off with this overview of maturation. Now, I heard this recently by psychologist Steve Albin. Yes. Kids do well if they can. What that means is if a kid could do well, they would do well. And the concept of that is about having the skills to do well. And kids, nobody wants to do badly. And kids want to do well. They just might not know how.
Sure.
And so when it comes to our maturity, I don't think anyone really wants to be like, I want to be immature. We all want to be mature. But the question is how? And so I want to talk first about like, why do we need to talk about maturation, maturity? I don't know if you have any thoughts off the back. Why is this an important conversation? Why are we even doing it as a series as a church?
Yeah, I think part of what we're doing as Christians is being shaped into the image of God in Christ. So we're becoming like Jesus, or we are being made into his image. And so it's less something that we do to ourselves and more something that God does in us through the power of His Spirit. And yet we have some responsibility to be mature. And so maturity is an essential part of our Christianity, is to grow, is to be disciples. And a disciple is learning. Disciple is following his rabbi, is growing. And we are not only to be disciples, but also to make disciples. And part of that is teaching. Right. So you can try to be a Christian without maturing. Doesn't work very well.
I think part of the reason why I've been looking forward to this is I have a number of friends that they probably say they deconstructed. It kind of hit 2020 was about the time where obviously our world flipped upside down, COVID, massive changes, people couldn't go to church. And I think there's a real testing moment there where people didn't have the same rhythms, they didn't have the community that they had, and all of the structures that had held faith together for a lot of people were suddenly removed. And then finally faced with, on multiple levels, but they were finally faced with like, what is my faith actually like? And I think it has really challenged church leaders, myself included, to be like, what do we have when we can't meet in the way in which we want, in the format that we like what is it? And I think what revealed to me was that so often in churches, we prescribe this kind of one-size-fits-all approach where it's efficient for us as leaders and it kind of helps us organize things, and there's some health to that. Yeah. But I found that for people who, they reached a point, I wouldn't necessarily go far as saying an existential crisis, maybe a faith existential crisis, during COVID, that they were like, I don't know what I have. And all the stuff that you have said that I need, either I can't do anymore or we're not doing anymore. And it doesn't seem like you care about me. And it really had a profound effect on people. And I think for me too, I was like, what is, with all the stuff that has been said to me, this is how you grow, you serve, you give, you get in a community group, you go on Sunday, all the kind of quintessential things, which are not bad or wrong in and of themselves, but it can end up being a bit of a short runway for people. And I think people started asking questions like, what's beyond this? Like, I don't have answers to the nuanced questions of life, and people started to get stuck and stagnant. So I'm looking forward to digging into this a bit more, because I'm not sure we've really given people much of an answer in the past. And hopefully this framework will give people a little bit more of a handholds and some sort of framework to work off of, where it's not just like, oh, this is all the stuff I need to do.
Sure.
But this is how maturation happens.
And practices like you're talking about, reading your scripture, being a part of a group, serving, giving, those are really important for our maturity. And they can be part of how we mature. They can also be part of how we are deformed, right? When the motivation is something other than love. And so I think when we just have part of the picture of maturity, then it's easy for us to go off track and get to a place where we're like, well, this isn't working anymore, so I'm going to throw out the whole thing.
Right.
Instead of pressing in to figure out, where is Jesus in this?
I think even contextually, within Northridge, we don't have a particularly long message on a Sunday. And that, for some people, is like a downside. They're like, well, the message needs to be this, it needs to be that, we need to have more of that. And in some ways, it's like, do we really need to? But there's something, what I hear when people say that is that they're hungry for more, which I love. I love hearing that.
That's why we're here.
But the answer isn't always just found on having a longer message. And hopefully we're able to answer some of those questions, that it's broader than just what happens on a Sunday. It's broader than just what happens in community group. They're all important. And you'll find that as we go along. There's a great quote. Warren Wiersbe wrote this. We're going to do a bunch of quotes and stuff like that. In the show notes, you'll be able to see where we're referencing this. But in his book, Be Mature, which is a study on James, he says, spiritual maturity is one of the greatest needs of the church today. Now, this was written in 1978. And I think this is still ringing true, so true today. So spiritual maturity is one of the greatest needs in the church today. Too many churches are playpens for babies instead of workshops for adults.
I heard a pastor, in terms of workshops for adults, heard a pastor say recently that he thinks the American church is over-inspired and under-trained. And that sometimes we just need a workshop. Sometimes we need to dig in and do the hard work of shaping our lives around Jesus and becoming people of love, instead of sitting and listening to another inspiring sermon.
And one of the things we want to hit, I think maybe next week we're getting to it, is it's not simply about just all you know. It's not simply going to a Bible study and learning more theology. It's actually, as you say, putting in the work. Again, it's not all about what we do, but positioning ourselves where it's not just about what we take in, but actually what comes out of us. So let's start with this. What does it mean to be mature? Got any thoughts?
I think it's one of those things you know when you meet someone who is mature. They have an ability about them to kind of navigate the ups and downs of life. They have a sense of peace to them, a purposefulness. There's a sense of a deep connection with God, with Jesus. There's a presence about them.
Kind of
an authenticity. And so we can try to define maturity, and the Bible defines it, right? Not lacking anything. James 1:4, let perseverance finish its works, you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Hebrews 5 says, anyone who lives on milk is still an infant. It's not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness, but solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. And there are fascinating themes throughout the scripture about maturity really being wisdom, applied wisdom. How do I know what's good and what's evil? And ultimately that being something that we receive from God, not something that we take and define for ourselves. And so maturity being the wisdom to receive the knowledge of good and evil from God and apply that to the way I live in the world, rather than defining good and evil and doing what's right in my own eyes.
Yeah. So that in both James and in Hebrews, so that word mature is really to do with being perfected and complete, right? So God has us on a trajectory. It's a sanctification process to create, almost like the master distiller, as I mentioned earlier, is they're positioning you in the right part of the warehouse, the right barrel for you, for the liquid to be complete. And sometimes that means changing into a different barrel, but there's this process to make us to be the completed product. Now, in many ways, the characteristics are the same across the board. He wants us to become more like Jesus.
Yeah.
But that timeline and the journey for everyone is just so vastly different that perfect and complete for you is such a different process and journey for you than it is for me. But at the end of the day, we're both striving to become more like Jesus.
And, for the philosophers out there, that the word for maturity or completeness that Paul is using is the same word that Aristotle is famous for, right? It's telos. What is the end of this thing? What is it? What are humans what's the point of a human being? And when we're pursuing Aristotle's thing is when something is pursuing its end, then that is virtue, right? When it's accomplishing the thing it was designed for. Yeah. And so we're not Aristotelians here. Mm-hmm. We're Christians. Yeah. But, Paul and Aristotle wrote in the same language. Mm-hmm. And so Paul's using this term for being perfected, for achieving the end you were designed for.
Yeah. There's in Luke 2:52, it describes Jesus as grew up in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And I think that's actually quite a beautiful picture where as we become more mature, there's favor with God and man. As you described that, like kind of that unflappable or peaceful, joyful presence. And we'll get to a little bit more in a little bit later of some of those characteristics. But at the end of the day, the next point on what it means to be mature is really about growing in love. Mm-hmm. When everything kind of distills down, we have the Great Commission and Great Commandment. And it really all stems around love. Though the Great Commission doesn't explicitly say love, the two work in harmony. And so like 1 Peter 4:8 is like, above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. 1 Corinthians 13:13. And now these three things remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Matthew 22:37, which is referring to Deuteronomy 6:5. Jesus replied to them, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. So that's what's really interesting about heart, soul, and mind is it's almost like this Venn diagram of the kind of similar things where of will and of desire and of purpose all kind of blending in so that all of our affections. So they're actually heart, soul, and mind we kind of separate a bit more, but they're actually quite overlap. But at the end of the day, as we mature, we are maturing in love to be more loving of God and others around us.
Is to be more like Jesus, right? When we are becoming loving. And a few months ago, I was digging into this because I was struck by a point that I heard someone make, that the defining characteristic of a Christian, of a disciple, is love. Like the metric for our discipleship is love. It's like, really? That's it? It's just love? And the more that I pursued that thought in Scripture, the clearer it became that, John 13, by this everyone will know you are my disciples if you love one another. 1 John 4, dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Galatians 5, Serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Colossians 3, over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. 1 Peter 4, above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. 1 John 3, we know that we have passed from death to life. How do we know it, that we passed from death to life? Because we love each other. And so the more that being struck by this idea that the key metric, can we measure our spiritual maturity? Not really.
Right.
It's not measurable. But if I'm trying to evaluate my life and my heart and say, am I becoming a more spiritually mature person? An easier way to ask that question for me is to say, am I becoming more loving? Mm-hmm. And being a more loving person is making me more like my Savior, Jesus.
Yeah. We're going to reference like our framework at the end as we go through this, but we're talking about makers and markers, which sounds kind of like against what you're saying of like, these are the metrics of which you know. So there are some things that the Bible tells us, these are markers of a mature Christian, but there's also things that contribute to making us more like Jesus. But at the end of the day, the main marker is, are we becoming more loving? And if that's the one thing that I think anyone was to take away from this whole series, is that call to love, and as you're looking in the mirror, and even as we go through this episode, you're like, am I this? Am I that? Am I that? It's like, it really comes back to love. I think it's such an important point. There is a call to maturity. It's not as if this is just something that kind of happens by accident. It's not something that you that just completely happens outside of you, but there is a call to be mature, and it's achievable too. It's not as if it's like out of our reach, but it can happen. In Philippians 2:13, it's like, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose.
Yeah.
His purpose being like mission, Great Commission, go make disciples, and Great Commandment to love God, love others. There's this combination here that he wants us to be part of this process. It really is this kind of paradox there.
Yeah, and I love that it's we are to work out our salvation, but it's God who works in you. And every time you see language in the New Testament about becoming more like Jesus, being made in the image of God, those sort of transformed type languages are always in the passive voice when it's talking about ourselves. The only time it's in the active voice when it's in Christ who's doing it in us, right? But it's always passive. So it's as if we are the recipients of the transformation that Christ is doing in us. Now, we can reject that transformation, and we can work against it. We can go our own way and take the fruit for ourselves, right? And we can define good and evil. But if we are going to become more like Jesus, I can't make myself more like Jesus. He does that in me. But I can posture myself and submit to him so that I can become more like him.
There's like so much to this that we're going to be hitting in the coming weeks that we're almost like alluding to right now, that there's probably going to be a lot of questions that's going to come up. So if you do have a question, write them in the comments below. Email us at podcast@northridgerochester.com. We'd love to be able to address those. One of the things though is the maturation journey. Robert Mulholland, he writes this in The Invitation to a Journey. Again, this will be linked in the show notes. He says this quote, when spirituality is viewed as a journey, however, the way to spiritual wholeness is seen to lie in an increasingly faithful response to the one whose purpose shapes our path, whose grace redeems our detours, whose power liberates us from crippling bondage of the prior journey, and whose transforming presence meets us at each turn in the road. In other words, Holistic spirituality is a pilgrimage of deepening responsiveness to God's control in our life and being. Thus, spiritual formation is the experience of being shaped by God towards wholeness.
Wholeness.
We could just keep saying wholeness. But it really is. It's this progressive, detouring journey to becoming whole, free, perfect, complete. I mean, who doesn't want that? You know, like going back to the quote, it's like we'll do well if we know how, the skills, and so hopefully some of these. But what we get from this is there's a progression. We see also in 1 Corinthians and in Hebrews this concept of milk to meat. So going from like an infant who can only have milk, so there's something prohibiting them from eating meat, of teeth, digestive system, you name it, and then going to meat. There's some progression there. So 1 Corinthians 3, 1-2, and then Hebrews 5, 12-14, if you want to look those up. In Hebrews it says, but solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good and evil. There's something here where it is, and you're going to feel this tension as we go along between our responsibility and God doing the work. But really, we see this progression. This is within the journey from milk to meat, child to adult. And what's really important is age is not a reflection of maturity, even specifically spiritual maturity. Because there are plenty of older people that are very immature, both in their character as a human being and spiritually in their maturity. So it doesn't always equal. And you can have some people that are younger that can still be like immature in their humanity, but actually show incredible maturity spiritually. So it doesn't always correlate.
For sure. Yeah. One of the things that I think is so striking, and I think this comes from John Mark Comer, when you talk to really old people, you seem like you just find two types. Either they're the nicest, most kind, generous people, the sweetest things that you could ever meet, or they're really grumpy and angry. And you don't usually find a whole lot of really old people in their late 80s and 90s who are not one or the other, who are sort of in the middle. And I think because of years of practicing the same types of behaviors, they just, the nice people tend to become nicer, and the mean people tend to become meaner. And that's how we work as humans, because we have patterns of behavior that reinforce themselves over and over and over again. And so there's that's connected. The reason I thought of that is like this idea that just because somebody's old doesn't mean they're mature.
Yep.
And so as we age, we can actually further devolve into more immaturity in a way by reinforcing patterns of behavior that are deforming instead of positively formational.
It's such an important point, because I think I was having a conversation with someone who just recently, they were listening to the podcast about when we had Andy Hartman on our Suffering series. And he's a psychologist, and we're talking on attachment theory. Now, this person had a history of trauma, and they were really impacted by it. There's something that really pushed them towards, all right, there's some things that I need to deal with. And they're in their mid-60s. And I don't see many, there are some, don't get me wrong, who are still like, I'm not giving up in this road of humility. There's still things I need to learn. They're not, to your point of like the patterns, right? Is like, I think there's reiterating the same pattern of teachability and humility, not just of the spiritual practices, but the posturing ourselves to, we're not done. There's still things to grow. Yeah. You've experienced a lot, but there's a lot that God still wants to heal, redeem. They still want to work and shape and do with your life. And I'm just so encouraged by this person that's like not done.
Yeah.
In the mid-60s.
Yeah.
There's the next part of this would be slow growth too. It's like strong roots don't grow fast. There's a great book called A Long Road in the Same Direction by Eugene Peterson, which just the title alone, which I think is actually named after a poem, if my memory serves correctly. And it's really about, we think, and I mentioned this with regards to whiskey, the kind of energizing stuff, that you don't go to a distillery and tour the warehouse the whole time. Even though 80% of up to 80% of the flavor comes in the barrel, that's the real exciting stuff when it comes to flavor. But you want to see the mill going and grinding out the malted barley. You want to see the stills going and the heat and the smoke and the steam and all this sort of stuff going on. Yeah. But that's like such a small part of it. And I think we get so wrapped up in the quick, flashy, manufactured excitement sometimes. But really it's the slow growth, the slow roots that create a richer manifold of the fruit of the Spirit in the canopy of the tree that we are bearing the fruit on. And I think we get so enamored by the new that we forget about the slow.
Yeah, we used to have I don't know if Charlie still has it there on the whiteboard, but in our counseling office, a quote at the top of the board from the late David Paulison, who said, "Sanctification happens at a glacial pace." And I mean, glaciers are really powerful. Yeah. But really slow most of the time. And, sometimes in our life, God gives us these experiences or moments or crucibles of crisis that cause us to grow rapidly. Yep. But often our growth is slow. And he seems to be okay with that. I mean, that's the way that he made us. And so sometimes we need to be patient and receive the growth that God gives as he gives it, rather than trying to manufacture it, as you've said.
I don't have the reference in front of me, but the different soils that Jesus used in the parable, where like the rocky soil, it grows up quick and then withers, and the soil around thorns, it kind of gets taken over.
Choked out,
And he's trying to communicate, I think, so time and again, that it's slow. He uses so many agricultural analogies that I don't think is just because they were, at the time, it made sense to them more. I think we're just more disassociated with agricultural terms because of our food, what do you call it? The way in which we get food to the table, effectively. Yeah. We don't have to pluck the chickens, but we are able to, the slow growth, the root structure that takes place is, hopefully that kind of allows someone to kind of breathe a sigh of relief. There's this pressure, I need to grow, I need to be something, I need to be more like Jesus. And I love that hunger and desire, but really it's like, okay, great. It's going to be slow going, and that's okay.
Not that you don't pursue it with fervor, right?
Yes.
There is zeal. This is good.
Fear and trembling.
Yeah. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Yeah. We ought to be zealous in our pursuit of Christ-likeness. We ought to pursue with passion. I mean, it's hard to read Paul and not feel the passion come through, right? He's striving with everything within him that he might present them mature and complete. He has a goal and he's going all in for it. And so just because the process might be slow doesn't mean that we should be any less diligent in pursuing it. Right?
Well, I can't help but just believe that God wants a mature bride. Not an immature bride. And it's sad because I think a lot of people are stuck. Not knowing what to do or where things are at. And I believe through this series, God's going to mature our church.
That's hard.
And we're going to be more on the trajectory of being mature, being rooted, being less thrown from side to side. And I think one of the ways that I want to do this is we are going to go through some stages of spiritual maturity. And as we go through this, I'd like you to consider, what stage am I in? And not in a woe is me kind of a thing. Just be honest with yourself of, yeah, I'm actually kind of a bit more immature. This isn't like a detailed, comprehensive list, but I will say that there's a fantastic book that personally rocked my world in my perspective called The Critical Journey. It's pretty detailed and I wouldn't say dense, but it's fantastic. And a lot of this is going to be adapted from that book. And one of the things that he said that struck me was that you can be in multiple stages at once, which feels a little bit of a cop-out, but it's not as if it's this sort of just linear thing that we go from immature to mature. But we can regress. There's going to be certain areas, especially with the markers and makers that we're going to talk about in the weeks to come. Some areas are going to be a lot more mature than others. And I think what we somewhat expect that just because I might be a mature human being, I'm going to be mature spiritually. And so there is going to be an overlap as we go through these where you're going to find, yeah, I think I'm fairly resilient at things, but I'm really immature spiritually, or vice versa. So before we get there, I want to quote Wiersbe again, because he says this: not everybody grows old. Not everybody who grows old grows up. There's a vast difference between age and maturity. Just underlines that point. So first part is this: infant. What do you think of, Matt? When you think of like infant Christian, baby Christian, what comes to mind?
Oh man. I mean, when I think of infant, I just, I love babies. So I want to, well, I want the baby that I can hold. There's a lot of excitement and passion often with brand new Christians.
Yeah.
They really love Jesus. They recognize in a lot of ways that it's easy for those of us who have been Christians for a long time to become kind of numb to who we were. Right? We have to remember, like Paul says, remember who you were. But for them, it's brand new.
It's new revelation.
Yeah, and so they're learning quickly. There's also a sense of dependence on others because they know that they have a lot to learn. And so they're just like, help me, give. So there's a dependence that it can be like just a lack of clarity because there's so much new, and often, somebody who's a brand new Christian is gonna need direction. We were just talking in community group last night. Somebody's like, I need to read the Bible, but where do I start?
Yeah.
Right? So it's that kind of thing. You're just an infant.
Right.
They
don't really know how to communicate as infants.
How do I pray? Like what?
Yeah. You're learning so much as an infant, and you're learning very, very fast.
Very fast.
But like when I think of when my boys were babies, it's like when they needed something, they didn't say, "Can I have some food, please?"
Yep.
It was done the only way they knew how. So there's a lot of grace to extend here because it's like they're just trying to figure it out. It's like, how do I wield the scriptures? How do I make sense of it? What was that quote earlier? In order, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purposes. That was Philippians 2. It's like it's doing something in you. And sometimes like we don't always act at the beginning like we're supposed to. But I think the rest of us are kind of have a bit of a judgmental attitude sometimes. We're like, you're a Christian now. Stop messing around. And there's some accountability to that, but that's how we learn.
Yeah.
It's such a great stage. I love hearing, even in stories, we hear a lot of these stories too, is like someone who I was, but God, and now.
Yeah.
Someone who's been a Christian for 30 years. That happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
So there's a very clear revelation of who God is. It's very fresh and exciting, as you say, because of that sudden change.
Now, when the infant grows up and becomes a child, where are you now as a child?
So in the critical journey, this stage is really to do with community. So you're as an infant, you're a sponge. You start to get like your legs under you. You're not just crawling anymore. You're walking. You're climbing. But you, this is terrible. But I'm like thinking about it with my dog, who we had a puppy. And the first 16 weeks was critical for socialization. They need to experience new world. But I think as a child, it's really important for you to develop friendships. So as a Christian, as a child Christian, and you're like, okay, I'm kind of at the stage where I'm not in this on my own. Like, what's next for me? It really is, but again, a community. That's why we have community groups, is for you to be known, to be loved, to learn to love others, and to be loved. Because as we grow in love, it can be really hard to understand how to receive the love of Jesus and know how to ask for help. But also, it's an incubator, it's a greenhouse, community groups, to be able to love and be loved in a safe environment.
Yeah.
Because if you just go out and immediately just try and do some things as an infant Christian, and you don't really know how, you can have some really good effects, but it might be, it's like giving a gun to a monkey. It's like, it's probably not a good idea. Like, so there's some training that needs to happen, you know? Maybe that was a bad analogy, but.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're skeptical, that's fine. Yeah, I find that at this stage, it's really important to have a community around you, to be loved, to learn to be loved.
And then from there, where do we go? From a child?
Next, it gets a little stinky into the adolescent stage.
Stinky.
You're seeing that we go through it. So as we go from like an infant to a child, that we are kind of paralleling it to just our own natural human growth.
Yeah, right.
Because it's a really good parallel. So in adolescence, at this point, we're kind of exploring our independence and gifting. When you think back to when you're an adolescent, you're starting to be like, I don't want to spend time with my parents. Like I like, you kind of are pushing the boundaries a little bit more of your own abilities. Though you're not necessarily quite confident yet, you still need some protection. But here you become a bit antsy. You can't really sit in your hands. You want to put your faith into action. You want to explore this world and this faith. And this is such a great time to put yourself into a serving opportunity.
Yep.
We have a bunch of serving. This is why we talk about it in Northridge. You'll find us talking about it all the time, is like, put your faith into action. Similarly, in a safe environment, as an incubator environment, a greenhouse environment of community groups at the child stage, as an adolescent stage, for you to hone maybe leadership skills or how you work as a team, how you work. I mean, being able to know how to serve in one of our serves teams, to be able to take some of those principles to work is really, really helpful. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the adolescent stage.
No, I do think there's in adolescence, in our human maturity of adolescence, there's often some rebelliousness there. That's not necessarily how we think about it in the context of spiritual maturity.
Sure.
But there is just the sense of like, yeah, I want to do something. Like I've been dramatically changed by Jesus. I've gotten into community where I feel loved, and now there's a sense of like, now it's my turn to give back. I want to do something with all these things I've been learning, and I want to have an impact in the world and other people. And so, but there is still a childlikeness about it in a lot of ways.
What makes me think of it is like I would say when I was at this stage, I remember I'd moved to the States to study at Moody Theological Seminary, right? And the Armenian Calvinism debate was hot. But it seemed that even though we're in a Bible college, people didn't have the maturity to know when to stop. And when those are great things to talk about, but and need to be fleshed out on a theological level. But there's like a heat to these arguments that it's just not particularly profitable. That a mature adult, you know, as you described earlier, I'm not convinced that they would really get involved with the same kind of fervency. But you almost kind of need to work through. I remember having a conversation with my dad about infant baptism.
Sure.
And it just got overly wrapped up into it because I was immature. So that's what I think of when I think of like adolescence. Sometimes in that rebellious thing, you think you know more than you do, but really you don't.
I almost always think I know more than I do.
I will say, this is actually really uncomfortable, at least on my end, because I see you as more mature than I am. Being like talking about spiritual maturity when, and I think you'd probably say this too, is we got so much still to grow in. This is not coming from a place of we know it all. So hopefully in this, it's like we are the model subjects of what maturity is, but there are certain things that we've kind of discovered as we've studied the Bible and as we've trying to figure out how do we help our church. But we have still got so much to go on.
A long way to go.
Right. Yep. Next phase is young adult.
Yep.
What have you got?
Yeah, you're young adult. You're out of the house now.
Thank you for saying young adult as opposed to young adult.
I
think you say, for our American audience, it's young adult.
Young adult.
I say
young adult.
Young adult. Yeah. But at this stage.
Yeah, you're out of the house, right? This is your faith your own?
Yeah.
Right? And you're in a lot of ways being put to the test. Like you're going to get some challenges that maybe you haven't experienced yet in your faith. Maybe you overcame some significant challenges to come to Christ, but now there's some questions that you have about your faith. You're trying to figure out, where do I fit in the world? How do I live in my relationship with God and with other people? And there's sometimes a bit of a sense of being uncovered. Like I'm no longer under the protection that I felt when I was a child. And so sometimes I think there's a sense that the things that I've done before to help me grow aren't really working anymore, or at least not the same way or to the same degree. Like some people I think can get to a point, and I've experienced this, of you feel like you just kind of hit a ceiling, or you're on a plateau and like, what's happening to me? Like, where did God go? So I think there's sometimes a time of struggle in this young adult phase to know what's my place, what's happening to me, how do I continue to grow? I don't know. What do you think?
This is where I think the deconstruction movement took off. Is because I think a lot of people got to a young adult phase, and I saw a lot of it, particularly in Christians who grew up in the church.
Yeah,
it wasn't just like new Christians; it was like new Christians who still remembered who they were before. But for a lot of Christians that grew up in the church, they were just like, "I'm done with this kind of. You just want me to come to church and milk me for all that you need of me." When you really don't, it doesn't seem like you really care about me. And so when it comes to that, it's like, if you're basing your faith off of what you produce and your value as a Christian to how you serve, basically being caught up in that adolescent stage, it's like they love you because you have tons of energy and you'll just expend it, which is good. But there comes a point where I found that as you say, the rubber meets the road, and whether who you have known God to be and the hardship that you meet, either, in the critical journey, they talk about it they call it this stage of the inward journey, where you're really coming to terms with who you are in light of who God is. And so all the things that you've kind of relied on before start to come into question again. And you're like, is God really faithful for me, that was coming to the States, culture shock.
Sure.
Again, we can be in multiple stages at once. I'm not saying, I'm now a maturing adult. And there's parts of me that I think are a maturing adult, and there's probably some of me that's still stuck in a child. But when coming to the States, and I was really questioning, like, God, I did what you asked me to do. And this was not what you said, or at least I expected.
Yep.
And so your expectations start to get challenged a little bit. And here, this is where I think the church can feel less helpful for people, where the answers of just get in a group, give, serve, start to kind of not have the same punch like they used to. And they start wondering, well, this isn't really helping me. And I think people wrongly blame the church for that. Because you didn't get to become a young adult without going through those steps that are needed in the church. And sometimes, like I said, the deconstruction movement kind of criticizes the church. Well, the church is not giving me this. And the church we have some, as leaders, have to answer for that.
Sure.
Which is partly why I think we're doing this series right now, is because we want to have an answer for it. But we need to wrestle with the wrong expectations of God in ourselves in that inward journey and come to find God almost again. That leads us on to that maturing adult. You kind of get past some of those trials. You're challenged again, and you might look back into young adult where you're questioning those things, but you get to maturing adult. There's a bit more resolved here, where they've been tested, they've endured some things, they've gone through some things, and they've come to a place of like, I don't know everything right now. But I know that God's good. He loves me. And those things are made for a reason. We went through the series on suffering. I think a maturing adult has a better grasp of suffering than the previous stages. Because you go through that young adult and you're like, I know who God is. I'm more confident. And some of those practices even has sustained them. They've found prayer. They've found God in that prayerful state because that's what's grounded them through it. But they're much more resolved, I've found. Any thoughts on maturing adult?
And I think I like that you chose to put maturing instead of mature adult there, because I think it is, there's never a sense where we land in a place of, now I'm mature. I wasn't mature yesterday, but today I'm mature. So I think that it's important to make the connection that this is a process. And there's a level of maturity that we can kind of settle into knowing who we are. As a young adult, you're figuring out, who am I and how do I interact in the world? And over time, as you relate more to God, there's a self-awareness and understanding of my place. And sometimes, you need to get dumped out of one barrel into another. And God will do that. But as we're obedient and connected to Him.
That reference of needing to be, your maturation needs to be finished somewhere else. That for me was the analogy of me coming to Rochester. Felt God calling me to Chicago, but it was like, no, it's time for you to go to a different barrel. I have some things that you need to absorb from me over here. I'm very grateful to be here talking to you fine folks. The last one is we're calling elder, which, as you referenced earlier, there's that, as Comer articulated, there's kind of two type of people. There's that kind of peaceful, grace-filled, and there's a kind of grouchy, almost bitter type of elder. But as we say elder, we're not simply just talking about the role of elder, but that place where there's a peace. What's interesting, Roland Rolheiser, he has a few different stages, which I've referenced before, but at this stage, it's the struggle to give your death away. And it's about what you leave behind. And it's the process isn't done. We're not done until we die and meet Jesus. That's when we are truly perfected and finished off. as we enter his glory. But in the elder stage, there's so much to be given. 'Cause I think in our culture where we see retirement as this, all right, let's go to the golf course, or let's kind of go to the beach. Let's just, I know this might offend some people because we have a lot of snowbirds. Let's just get our house in Florida and we'll straddle our time between Florida and Rochester so we get the warm weather everywhere. Mm-hmm. We're not designed just to coast at the end.
No.
We're given a mandate to still love God and love others. And that's not to say you can't do that by like straddling, but it feels like retirement or becoming an elder. Now, it doesn't just begin at retirement.
No.
But there's still so much left that it's not just about, oh, I can be comfortable now. Mm-hmm. And the people that I love at this stage, and we have many who are volunteer staff, not getting a paycheck, but they're here just wanting to serve and get. I mean, Jeff, who's been around here for goodness knows how long, he's just faithfully, quietly, joyfully using his gifts to serve the church. Mm-hmm. Talk to me more about elder.
Yeah, I think there's not really a clear line between a maturing adult and an elder, and just as all these, it's not like, one day I'm one, the next day I'm the next. But I think there's a settledness, and there's a sense of, just like when the child comes to that adolescence phase and they're ready to like really give, like I want to do something. Mm-hmm. There's a depth of maturity about someone who is so close to Jesus, who is so full of love, that they can't help but just like dump that love out everywhere they go. Yeah. And so that sense of peace, that joy, being able to look, death in the eye with a smile. And still be actively giving your life and death away. Yep. In the way that you serve people, you engage. I was just talking to one of our team members, who's older than both of us, and just told me how for the first time, someone older than him came and said, "Let's have coffee. I want to encourage you." Right? And so now, at a later stage in his life, he has a mentor who's decided, let's meet regularly. I want to pour into you. I want to encourage you. And that's the kind of thing that elders walk around and do. Yeah. Right? Because they're just, they're closer and closer to the image of Jesus. They're more and more full of love that's just spilling out wherever they go.
So good. There's a quote from The Critical Journey. It says, people usually get stuck at a particular place in the journey because we find it more comfortable to sit than to move. So hopefully as we've kind of gone through those stages, and again, it's all about, as Matt, I think really, you articulated really good about, at the end of the day, as we become an elder, you're so much closer to Jesus and you're just oozing out love. We're progressively becoming more loving, and we know how to receive and give love much more fluidly. But like we said at the beginning, nobody wants to stay immature. Mm-hmm. But what keeps us stuck is we get comfortable. And some people just get stuck. I think there's a lot of people that haven't found their way back to church from the deconstruction movement because they're kind of comfortable just criticizing the church.
It's easy.
It's so easy. Or they might have dotted to another church and they haven't really wrestled with themselves in God. So they're just comfortable kind of being critical. There's so many like YouTube and social media channels that are just there to criticize.
Sure. And
it's not healthy. And it's keeping someone stuck. Similarly to kind of the people in the more emotive stages early on, they just want to, they might be more attracted sometimes to worship music because it makes them feel, and their faith is fueled by what is emotional. And it's not all about what you feel and what's emotional.
Says the worship leader.
Says the worship leader. Yeah, I've completely changed. Honestly, I I was in an environment for a very long time where it was just this massive emphasis that the worship experience needs to be window rattling, wall shaking, like the best it can possibly be every single Sunday. And I think it's an unrealistic expectation because it's God doesn't always show up shaking the windows like it did in Acts.
Right.
Or in Isaiah, where it's like the manifest presence of God came like a cloud. It doesn't always happen like that.
Sometimes it's a whisper.
Sometimes it's a whisper. So then if that's the expectation, as a worship leader, it becomes on me to manufacture something in people so that it renders the heavens down. I think that, so I've really chilled out in that. But some people are just hungry for it, and they'll dot to whatever is in their emotional and spiritual immaturity, just kind of keep chasing that high, and they get stuck. So I'm curious from your end of things, where do you see people, not necessarily where do you see people getting stuck, but what are some of the things that keep people stuck?
Yeah. I know for myself, there's a few things that keep me stuck. One is just sin, right? Sin just distances us from God. And the whole journey of maturity is getting closer to Jesus. And so the more that we hold on to the sin in our lives, the harder it is for us to get closer to Jesus. When I'm pursuing sin, I don't want to be praying. I don't want to talk to God because I know He's got some things to say to me that I don't want to hear. And so I think that's just so much of our spiritual journey is just dying to ourselves.
Yeah,
it's dying to ourselves. Like I was saying earlier, the things in the New Testament about becoming like Jesus are in the passive voice. The things that we actively do are kill our sin.
Yeah,
Die to ourselves. And so we're constantly facing the choice between, am I going to take for myself and choose to define what's right for myself and go my own way? Or am I going to receive from God and submit to His way? And so it seems like such a simple thing, but I think in our practical lives, whether it's, early in our faith and it's the like gross sins, not gross meaning like disgusting, but like the external, really obvious ones, or whether it's the pride and selfishness, and it's the more like hidden, subtle sins that come, that are always there, but become more and more obvious the more closer we get to Jesus, the more that we see the subtler sins in ourselves that are just as sinful.
Yeah.
And so I think when we hold on to sin, it's really hard for us to continue to grow and mature.
Yeah.
And I think there's, along with sin, the other thing that I think has kept me stuck at times is just a fear of what might happen when I get a little bit closer.
Explain that.
So even if it's not particularly great, I'm really familiar with where I am right now.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And familiar breeds a sense of comfort and security, right? But if I, it's like, what's the quote from Bilbo to Frodo about stepping outside your front door? When you take that step, you can't untake that step, and you don't know exactly what it's going to be on the other side, right? And so there is just a sense of like, I can get to a place in my faith, in my maturity, where I'm like, I think I'm pretty good. Like I'm
good enough.
I'm doing all right. Like I'm sort of managing my sin okay, and nothing particularly like crazy going on. I might be a little short with my kids sometimes, and I can pray about that. Maybe I don't pray as much as I think I probably should, but I pray a little bit, so you can get to a point where you're just like, I'm going to just coast here because it's comfortable.
And why is that so bad?
Why is it so bad? I don't
like the saying bad. I'm not saying that in a moral sense, but like, why is that not okay?
Because I think God has more for us. And that there's more love and joy and peace on the other side of the door when you step out the door, right? We don't get the story. The ring still ends up in the hand of Sauron if Frodo doesn't walk out his front door, right? And so, now, you can't take the analogy too far, right?
Sure.
God would accomplish his purposes in a different way.
Right.
He doesn't need us to do what he's going to accomplish in the world. But there are things that God wants to do in us that he won't force us to do.
Sure.
Right.
I would counter maybe that he is creating us, his people, to be his ambassadors. So he does need us. And that's why he's wanting to mature us. But it's not all hinging on us individually.
Yeah, I think I would push back on the word need. Like, I don't think God needs us. But God is a working through people kind of God. That's who he is.
Yep.
N.T. Wright says he's a dianthropic God, a working through people God. And so that's the nature of God, is he created us and he works through us. And so does he need us? No, God doesn't need anything. But he chooses to use us and work through us because that's the kind of God he is. That's who he is. It's part of his nature to work through, because he is love. And love is enacted with the other. So I don't know where we're going with that point, but
it was more so what keeps us stuck, right? And almost what I hear you say is that we kind of we're good with we're okay with being okay.
Yep.
But there's so much more that God wants to use us for, and wants to show us more about himself. And really, if we're not growing, we're regressing. I also see people kind of getting stuck because they see, if I just grow in my knowledge, then I'm growing.
Yep.
But that's like, just if I'm working out my right bicep, that's all I do. And I never do anything with it. Like, I mean, you get puffed up.
Yep.
I just know this more. That kind of goes back to even the adolescent, or like the Calvinist, or the young adult Calvinism, Arminian kind of argument, is you just get stuck in either just knowing more, and that's the people that I just want a longer message, I want a deeper message, tend to just want to know more. And Drew's been very frank with this, of like, no, I actually think we need to do more with what we know.
Yep.
He's very upfront with that. And then I also think people get stuck with service. Is like, and I think the boomers brought generosity and service to the church as we know it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is what's going to happen as the boomers, love you, start to die out. What's going to happen, because they brought that sense of servant-heartedness and generosity to the table. But I think also they kind of get, like, boomers can get stuck in just, well, I'm serving all the time, I'm giving so much of my time, that they don't necessarily, they kind of get stuck. So, sometimes too, is I think people get caught up in the wrong mission. They get caught up in fighting either a political mission, like, or patriotism, or the schools. They get caught up, like, my mission is to make sure that my son or daughter is going to be, like, settled for college. We get caught up and get so consumed into a second or third priority. And we lose the forest from the trees. It's like, actually, our primary mission is to build the kingdom of God, and everything else is secondary to that. And so I think people get stuck in thinking that they're doing the right mission, but they're actually in that stuck state, misguided, thinking that it's become a primary issue.
Sure.
As we start to round out, there's this great quote. It's a little bit longer, but when it comes to like getting stuck, they say this: it's easy to mislead people into thinking that they can move themselves to the next stage by just doing the things listed, talking to the right people, or setting their mind to it. Nothing could be further from the truth. The journey of faith is our personal journey, and movement in the journey is the place of mystery, holy ground. Moving from one stage to another references timing. The movement from one stage to the next is frequently uncomfortable, or at least confusing.
Yeah, I have found the uncomfortable and confusing to be completely true.
Yeah.
I know we're supposed to be wrapping up, but I just in the last year, I have, found myself moving from a stage where I had been fairly comfortable to pursue more knowledge. Mm-hmm. It was a lot much easier to pursue knowing about God more, rather than knowing Him personally. Mm-hmm. And in order to connect with God relationally, I've had to, in some ways, connect with myself relationally in ways that I hadn't. And, I've been using this analogy recently of, you have a trough that's full of water, but there's like just muck on the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. And the it can be clear and fairly settled, but there's still muck in there, and it's getting into the water even if you can't really see it. But once you start like scraping the muck off the bottom, what happens? I mean, it's like the water is all cloudy and nasty. You're not going to drink that. But until you do the work and scrape the muck off the bottom, you're never going to really get a clean trough that you can use with really pure water. Yeah. And so I think in some ways I'm in a phase now of kind of like chipping away, stirring up the muck a little bit.
It's good.
And I don't know where that puts me in the...
Well, it kind of teases up. So where we're going to go for the next coming weeks. So we kind of laid out the overview. Why is maturity important? There's a journey to maturity. It's not, as we'll find, it's not just clean cut. Mm-hmm. But there's... The first thing, which is for next week, is really to do with reciprocal relationships, this give and receive paradoxical nature of the kingdom of God. And that's a relationship with God, with others, with creation, and self, which is an interesting one. And then we have 4 makers and markers, things that contribute to our spiritual maturity in the context of giving and receiving, and also markers, things that are like, this is actually markers of mature Christians as you go through those stages of maturity. So as an elder, they understand and do these 4 things. The first one is this: pain. This is how do we deal with pain? We obviously had a series on suffering, but we're going to have another psychologist, Christine Jean-Jacques, which I'm really excited about. How do we navigate the pain? She's very passionate about this in the church. How do we navigate the pain? How does that restrict us in our maturity? How do we deal with it and move on from it in a healthy way? Because it's inevitable. Next one is this: purpose. What God's called us to a purpose. We find out you've done a lot of work in Genesis. Mm-hmm. He's called us to a purpose. He's given us a global or a collective purpose as the church, and individual callings for what we're to do. Next one's presence. You can see the 4 P's because we're church, we've got to have it. 4 P's. Next one's presence. You mentioned before, like elders have this they ooze this presence of God with them. Like we can have a really immature presence about us as we represent Jesus. So really the whole story is wrapped up in presence. God being present with us as we kind of tee up for Christmas. It's like Emmanuel, God with us. He's present. Yeah. And the last one is practice. The things that we do that posture ourselves for God to move in us and the practices in which we show love to God, others, creation, and to self. So that's what's coming up in the next 5 weeks after this week. I don't know if you have any thoughts as we wrap up, Matt, but this has been a good conversation.
Just one more commercial. It's not only that we have the four sermons and 6 weeks on the podcast, but we're also doing an Equip class with Nick Horton and his Equip team. Really looking forward to it, called The Narrow Path. It's going to be 3 weeks in December. Kind of as we wrap up the podcast, we'll be launching right into that 3 week series, kind of a workshop of like, how do I make these things happen in my life?
We'll add a link in the show notes as well. So if you want to sign up for that, you can go there. I said this earlier, but God wants to mature you.
Yeah.
And I don't believe you want to be stuck or you want to be immature. And so travel along with us in this journey over the next 6 weeks. Let's see how we can be mature. Not just about trying to get to the next stage, but really having our sights on Jesus. He's the one that we're supposed to be like. And all these markers, these principles all come from Jesus himself in the Bible that he gave to us, and wanting to allow us, to craft us, to mature us, to being the city on a hill, to be the salt and light to those around us, so that we can love God and love others. We say this every week. We can become a little better if we love God and love others a little better. See you next week.